Hello and welcome to another practical. So today we will continue with a live commentary. This was a clip that was sent to me by another pilot. I did not look at it in advance. Besides, please let me know if the audio is better. In the previous videos a couple of people mentioned that my mic is too low, so I hope I fixed it. Okay, so we have Hookbill outside of a complex against Navy Thrasher inside. The Hookbill is pretty standard fit. This is bulkhead, probably bulkhead rig Hookbill with a tracking disruptor, and he swapped a web for a micro warp drive. Now this is a useful trick to know actually. When you fight against destroyers in this Hookbill, the normal fit is double web. You don't really need two webs because you already have plenty of control. So the typical solution is to swap the second web for a tracking disruptor usually. And it gives you much better mitigation against destroyers. But you can also swap it for a micro warp drive. And usually you don't really need micro warp drive because you don't have that many kiting destroyers or web kiting destroyers for that matter. But against Thrasher fleet I think it's quite sensible because one of the most popular Thrasher fleet feats is artillery kite. And once you go against artillery kite out of position, you kind of need an anti-kiting feat. So you need a micro warp drive. Okay, so let's see how it goes. Overall, this is quite a tough matchup for Hookbill because Thrashers, even Tick 1 Thrashers, they are not really vulnerable against tracking disruptors that much. So it's quite difficult to utilize this damage mitigation strategy. Okay, so we have Thrasher fleet 25 kilometers away, which suggests that this is an artillery Thrasher. You think you should still check it, check the guns. Let's see if the pilot does it. He does not. Okay, so in many situations you can be lazy and get away without checking for guns because you will see them in the log anyway, and usually the first seconds are not that critical in these matchups. For fights against Navy or Tick 1 Thrasher, I would still check for guns, because against Thrashers you need to make the right decision for positioning, and if you make a wrong decision it can't really be fixed and you will be just dead. So for example, if you assume that the Thrasher is artillery and you start brawling him and he turns out to be autocannon, when you are just dead. And vice versa, if you assume that the Thrasher is autocannon and start scrum kiting him, but he's actually artillery, when you are also dead. The latter actually happens quite often against Tick 1 Thrashers, because Tick 1 Thrashers can afford to sit pretty close to the beacon, and when frigates come in, they see a Thrasher close to the beacon, they assume that it's autocannon Thrasher, they start scrum kiting, and then they're just dead. Because this Thrasher is not autocannon but artillery. But okay, I guess we will see it in the log. Okay, so this is artillery Thrasher. And the fit is quite weird. So we see meta guns and low meta guns as well, which is suboptimal. And besides, let me rewind a bit. And besides, I don't really understand what this Thrasher is doing in terms of positioning, because his speed is very low. If he has macro warp drive when he needs to move, and if he doesn't, then it's just a weird fit. So what you do normally as a Thrasher pilot, so you see that a frigate comes in. The frigate sees that you are quite far away from the beacon, and then the frigate still decides to engage you. So normally frigates can just leave, because as a destroyer you don't have enough scan resolution to tackle them before they warp out. So if the frigate actually decides to engage you in this position, you need to be very careful as a destroyer pilot. Because it kind of raises a lot of red flags, and it means with a pretty good degree of probability that you are facing some kind of counterfeit. So you start looking at speed of your opponent, and here you will see that it's a micro warp drive Hookbill from the speed down here. Once you see that it's anti-kiting Hookbill with a micro warp drive, you need to immediately align out somewhere. Let's say this would be a decent spot, or this would be a decent spot, or this would be a decent spot with your heated micro warp drive. So the idea is that you try to delay getting scrammed for as long as possible. Because if a Hookbill decides to chase you, he will eat full damage from your artillery because the transversal will be very low. You will be scrammed eventually, because obviously frigate is quite a bit faster, but you need to maximize the damage that you can inflict on your opponent. And this Thrasher just not doing anything. And if you're not doing anything and just sit still, then you will get one shot. And after that, the frigate will be on tight orbit. Let's see how it goes. Yeah. Yeah. So Thrasher got one hit. The second shot was a complete miss. And now Hookbill is on a tight orbit with an afterburner and a tracking disruptor. So Thrasher is dead. It may take a few more seconds to establish control properly, but I think this is pretty obvious outcome. This should be a pretty obvious outcome. Yeah, so now we just get misses. Is he? Yeah, we get misses. Yeah, so Thrasher is dead. One thing to note, if you fly these anti-kiting Hookbills, for example, you fly normal Hookbill, and when you see a slicer inside a complex, and to fight against a slicer, you are out of position, you obviously need a micro warp drive. You need to remember that these Hookbills, anti-kiting Hookbills, were very tight on cap. You cannot run your rep and your micro warp drive at all. You will just get capped out almost instantly. So the good rule of thumb is that you have one slingshot attempt with a micro warp drive. And if you are not successful, then you should just leave. against destroyers, one attempt is enough, usually, because we're just not fast enough. But against frigates, you may be tempted to go for multiple attempts, but my experience generally says that if your first attempt is unsuccessful, then you just need to use the remaining tank and cap to leave. Because even if you get the scram on a second attempt, you will be so low on cap, but you will essentially have no tank from ancillary rep. And in general, this is quite a sketchy situation. So I just go for one attempt, and if it's not successful, I just use the remaining tank and cap to kind of slingshot out of point and leave. And quite surprisingly, that this Thrasher has a scrum. You don't really fit scrum on a artillery kiting Thrasher at all. So I think his fit is a bit weird. And the piloting was not that great from a Thrasher pilot. But Hookbill played it well. But just for you to be aware, these matchups, when Thrasher pilot also plays it perfectly, they are not that easy for Hookbill. It's not like you just click micro warp drive once and then you just click orbit 500 and you win. It's quite a bit more complicated than that. Against the proper fit and against proper piloting, it's a lot more difficult. And against Tick-1 Thrasher as well. I would say that Tick-1 Thrasher is even more difficult because Tick-1 Thrashers have a bonus to tracking, and it's a lot harder to break their tracking and one tracking disruptor. Thrasher fleets, they do not have bonus to tracking, so it's much easier to mitigate with these kind of fleets with a tracking disruptor. Okay, pretty good fight. Hope you found it useful. So I will see you in the next practicals.